Let's welcome our speakers. Noel, would you like to go first and introduce yourself to the community?
Sure. I'm Noelle Lansfer. I am a owner of a consultancy, independent consultant in the design system space, and I'm also a design lead with Alaska Airlines. So I love all things design systems. I'm a total nerd, so I'm super excited to jump in and take a look at somebody else's design system for a bit.
John, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. I'm John Reedy. I look after user interface design and design systems at a company called T. Rowe Price. I'm working from London.
Love it.
Hey everyone, I'm Adrienne Morales. I am a design principal at HEB, which is a regional grocery space here in Texas and Mexico. I'm currently working on our Mortar design system, which supports multiple design languages and different platforms within both our customer-facing and enterprise-facing side of the business. And I am a type designer that's attracted to chaos and bringing order to it.
Love it. Eric?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Eric Owens. I'm a senior product designer here at Thumbtack, so overseeing our design system, thumbprint.design. And Thumbtack is a platform to connect customer and pros to do home maintenance and home improvements. Been in the design system space for 5, 7, 8 years or so. But yeah, kind of like leading that operation here at Thumbtack.
Love it, love it. And I see some community art from Alexander, so that's great. Thank you all for joining. The goal for this session is to inspect and reflect on how Salt Design System is being used within the JPMorgan products to learn best practices and grow together. One important thing is that there are a lot of design systems within the larger organizations, and this is the case for the JPMorgan. We went through the Chase, the actual B2C product, consumer-facing product. Unfortunately, Salt Design System is not being used there yet, but it will be great to cover that and talk about it, how to manage this situation with large enterprise organizations when there are multiple design systems. One important thing is that we are not inviting people who actually worked on this specific design system on the call on purpose, because we wanted to focus on the learning. So that's why we are not here to critique, we are here to learn. And yeah, let's get started. So if you would like to join our next session, there is another one. And by the way, interesting fact, Shopify just yesterday, they released a new design system, web components. I didn't go deep yet, but it's very impressive. So we will do the inspect and reflect on the June 5th with Dan Moll and others. So feel free to join, and that will be super fun. Great. And here are a couple of interesting materials around the theory part, around this inventory workshop itself, how you can go into the product and actually divide product into specific components, so it will help your design system teams be closer to the product teams and share the knowledge and share perspective and understand how your design system is being used within the product and what kind of interesting opportunities you will see there. As you can see here, we made some work. We went through the Chase bank. As I mentioned, JP Morgan is a large organizations. They have maybe hundreds of products. We took just one where we wanted to see what kind of components they are using and how design system is being used within this specific product. Let me pull a couple things from our secret board, and let's start with documentation. So I will paste a couple things here into the board. So the first things first, let's go through their Salt Design System documentation website. So let me open up the link and we can chat about it right now. 1 second. Any early thoughts, reactions on the Salt Design System documentation website? What you like, maybe some interesting highlights that you would like to discuss, maybe some interesting things that you would like to implement within your design system?
I have a couple things that I noticed off the bat. I really enjoyed their breakdown of themes. I think that's a hard thing to explain on a doc site because it's a bit more abstract. And I noticed that they kept it really org specific, which I thought was a really great call. So instead of spending a lot of times just like kind of describing themes broadly, they really went in and described their themes and how you should use their themes, which one is a legacy theme, which one is their new theme, how to switch between light mode and dark mode, those kinds of things that are really specific to this design system. I also thought that it was a good blend of an explanation for design and devs. it kind of kept like an overview feel on the themes area, but then kind of allowed you to explore both. But what I think is really hard to do and what they did really well is describe the design intent and then describe the implementation on the dev side. So I really enjoyed that. I thought it was really clear, and I'm not even, in the weeds on their system, but the things that I didn't recognize automatically, I assume are for their system specifically. The only thing that I called out that wasn't immediately obvious to me was how I should use tokens. And I think this is something that's really hard to do with themes because it's unclear of like, okay, should I only use a theme? There's also listing out of like singular tokens. And so it's like how to use themes and tokens together as a consumer was a little bit unclear. It could be documented elsewhere. I might have missed it between the theme page and the tokens page. But I found that interesting. There was kind of like a semantic breakdown as well of how to use like states and emotion with colors and things like that. So I was super curious of just like wanting to learn more about like, oh, this is super interesting. They have kind of this philosophy around color. They have single tokens. They have themes. How do those things work together? But overall, I really found the way that they described those two things in isolation really clear.
Love it. So this is the quick highlights, right? I just took some screenshots from the page with some diagrams. The diagrams are really helping people to understand and see all those tokens in real life. Do you have examples of how tokens were explained within the design system documentation? Maybe interactive examples?
Yeah, on theirs specifically, if we go to their tokens page, if you're able to pull that up,
Mhm.
under color, so foundations and then color.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if we go there, I thought this was interesting because you can just go ahead and copy a token. I liked the interactivity of it. I liked that there was this big list, but it was like, okay, if I have the ability to kind of copy and paste these, I'm not quite sure, what level they're sitting at here because I'm not sure if they're the semantic ones, if they're the primitive ones, if I should be using these in a theme. But if the intent is clear, this is a super nice and easy way to be able to come in and grab tokens as a developer, which I thought was super smart.
Love it.
And
Uh,
adding on to what Noelle shared, with the color token page, it's a really good example of seeing all the different inventory you have. But one of the things that I was hoping to see more within their design system is how to handle color around accessibility. Like, what is their scale? What are some of the do's and don'ts of how you want to maintain color contrast? I imagine most of the components already have that stuff handled in, but I was hoping to see a little bit more guidance around that stuff.
Love it. What's the thing about the carbon design system? I feel like that's one of the examples of how all those tokens could be visualized in action. So like any interesting highlights here?
I'm biased towards Carbon because I did work on one of the sub-design systems of Carbon, and when they were moving from Carbon 10 to Carbon 11 with the naming conventions for their tokens, they did a really great job of explaining the different layering model. That was something that a lot of designers struggle with. Even though I haven't been at IBM for a few years, I still leverage a lot of the guidance that Carbon has for their color themes to help educate designers within our organization to think about how to layer, how to design, when color should be used in certain ways to help supplement our stuff.
Yeah, I put some examples from the carbon. I also use them as a reference all the time because the amount of details and also explanations how different layering and different themes are being applied in the actual product. This is great. John, do you have any highlights related to the Soul Design System documentation that you like?
Yeah, I mean, been going through it, it looks really comprehensive. You can see so much work has gone into it. And it feels like it's been around a while. Like it feels like a lot of time has been spent on it because it goes really deep. It feels really specific to a particular area of JPMorgan. We know that they have a lot of different design systems. And I think that has allowed it to go really quite deep and specific. I really like the kind of the breadth of what they have, like they've got their foundations. They really go into a lot of detail around density models and typography, etc. Like you were saying, Noel, I think colors is quite surface level. It's like, here's the colors. It doesn't really talk very much about why you use the colors or the kind of educational parts of it, which I think it could do a little bit more of. But yeah, there's just so much there to go through. And for me, it's quite interesting. It feels almost like a non-public design system, like a very hard-working internal design system, but we get to look through it and see what they're doing. So that's really interesting.
That's true. Eric, any final thoughts on the Soul Design System documentation?
Yeah, what I think they've done a pretty good job at doing is at least demystifying that and providing like a good content hierarchy. I think that it's pretty easy to navigate across the entirety of this resource, from starting at about to foundations to themes to components, and starts to create a nice, I guess, narrative of just understanding how the system is intended to be used. And I'll say that it echoes in the same way of its sort of connective tissue, for lack of a better term, of where pieces are cross-referenced. So, for example, you have your navigation left-hand side, you got your content in the middle, but they're very conscious about, in their component level, tying back to where that's used in a pattern. And when you're in a pattern, it says what components are being used within this pattern, which was a really nice connective tissue to bring that sort of like story together if you're trying to understand the complexity of the either of the two or how to build something with a particular component.
Love it.
I was impressed with their transparency. There was somewhere in the site got a link to the GitHub repository, which has a really defined and outlined roadmap that's publicly available, which was really nice to see.
Really?
That's both for internal and external alignment about where the status of any project is. I think if you go to the projects tab on the right-hand side, there should be a roadmap that shows you a detailed orientation of what's in scope or what's being planned.
Wow, this is impressive. Wow, I love it. And I really love their patterns as well. Like the level of details that they put into the patterns is so impressive. It's just great. I'm sure if I will be working on patterns, I will take a look into Soul Design System to get inspirations from, because there's so many details. And yeah, Eric, this is great that they are sharing their roadmap publicly. Any general thoughts on this approach? I feel like this is like, I know that the Carbon also, they have a public roadmap somewhere. Yes, releases, I guess. Release radar. Yeah, that's the one. But let me check if they actually have similar things. Oh, they have roadmap, yeah. Actually, yeah, looks like most of the design systems, they have such roadmap on the GitHub. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, how open should design system be?
I think that this is a good testament to the open source nature of where contributions can come in or where they're going out and give the general alignment, is my issue being resolved? So I think that's a good piece into the organization being invested into that scope of work and finding how something is going to be resolved or how it's going to be assigned, right? So you can see probably about 50% of what we're seeing there has some level of assignment or someone working on that, but otherwise it also shows room for where someone can pick up work if need be.
Love it. And what, Adriana and Noel, what do you think about design roadmap? Because GitHub is usually for engineers. Designers are using Figma for that. Do you believe that it is a good example for us designers from engineering perspective to have this kind of roadmaps in Figma as well, maybe? Or maybe just putting a link to somewhere else?
Me personally, I like to have designers and developers using a lot of the same tools, but also has designers working in things like GitHub, Jira, or GitLab, because they should be working very collaboratively and able to see, where is design at when it comes to either exploring the component, designing it, how does it do the engineering handoff, and how does engineering start to implement it. I definitely do think you should meet people where they are. That means having either a link to your roadmap, whether it's in Figma, in Confluence, somewhere that is accessible, that maybe takes you out to that larger GitHub page.
I would definitely agree with that, Adriana. Different also.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I see some pros and cons to it, because I also love when designers and developers can share tools. But when it comes to something public, like a public roadmap, sometimes I think, depending on the organization, I'm not sure, JPMorgan might be one that struggles with this, but there's kind of a privacy of wanting to keep new designs under wraps until they're implemented. So in that way, it'd be worth having kind of design be a little bit more private because they're ahead of what's launching. But when it actually comes to the implementation phase and collaborating within the implementation phase, the sharing of tools for something like a public roadmap could be really useful.
We made the choice to unify our releases and our roadmaps between design and development. They're kind of more focused on, okay, if the community was wanting to know when the new tabs component was out, like we started out with kind of saying, oh, well, design will be ready in June and we're ready in September. And then it did people found it quite hard to understand in our community. And it always led to confusion. So what we did is we tried to kind of unify it, try and get as close as we can from an agile point of view, but then only really talked about the release of the final component in design and development, which has pros and cons, but it seems to have made things easier to understand in our community.
Love it. One of the other examples that we've seen is when we did Spectrum design system inspect and reflect, is the way how they are also showing the changelog within every component. So again, like when we are talking about design system, this kind of roadmap transparency brings a lot of trust, and you can see that Teams is actually working on things. So you will have the latest and greatest components available for you. And also another important thing that we saw within the Spectrum design system is the design checklist. So they call it design checklist, not code checklist, but it's interesting to have also visibility on things that are being covered and what kind of things are still missing. Maybe like for some accessibility bugs are still there, they are working on it, but at least there is like extra transparency, making trust, making sure that people, your design system customers, are actually believing in you and trusting and using your components. This is all great. So let's quickly dive into their Figma. So the thing that I love the most is that they shared everything publicly on their Soul Design System JPMorgan community profile on Figma. So feel free to take a look. This is like one of the examples of like really open design systems on the market where you can take a look, and they have colors, they have some legacy libraries that they are deprecating right now, themes, assets that are going into the Soul Design System components. And all those things are being used as a part of Soul Design System Figma component guides, where they are actually documenting things from design perspective. What I like, some interesting highlights from my side, is if we will go into the banners, for example, they are not deleting the things that are being deprecated yet, but they are communicating that to the end users that those kind of things, those kind of components will be retired soon. Any thoughts on the Figma side of things?
I kind of want to touch on what you just mentioned that Adobe does on their documentation on Spectrum, where they have a change log they provided. And I thought it was really interesting to see inside of Salt's design system that they also have change logs inside of each one of their notes. But I also see that basically it was frozen in time. I can see that most of everything kind of ended in like December 2024 at its most recent stage. And I don't mean that to pick on them, but just to think about that in terms of how do you keep those regular updates? Like, is this the resource to keep them updated in? And, did that sort of just fall off and say that is too cumbersome to just work with general change logs inside of that documentation resource? So just sort of as like, connective tissue that, could have lived on a different resource, but they embedded it directly into Figma instead, but also doesn't, curious to know whether or not that's kept up to date regularly.
Oh, do they have that within Figma, the changelog? I couldn't find it on the documentation website.
Yeah, so if you go to any of their Figma resources, and I was looking specifically in the Salt DS component and patterns, and it'd be on any of those components. So if you went to the accordion, for example, at the top left in the notes section, they have.
I was looking to other file. Okay, let me take a look. I feel like the challenge with Figma is that it's really hard to make some automations and integrations.
There you
Changelog
go.
here. Love it. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to like update everything. It's very time consuming. Noelle, do you have any thoughts on the Figma side? Like what things you like?
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about it. There's so many things that I really like about this. Like with the documentation site and the Figma and just everything that they're showing, I feel like it's very much like a peek into what they're actually doing, which I think personally more design systems should do. I love the polished look of like a really tidy documentation or really tidy Figma stuff. But this is like so much more useful to their users. Like even in the changelog notes, they're saying like, hey, discuss with this particular person this thing in the future. And I think that's cool because that's honestly how design systems work. Like
Yeah.
that's just real. And I think I'd love to see more of that kind of representation of like, even if it's open source, even if it's public, serving your users first. Maybe that goes a little bit against some of the open source mentality, but I think it's great because you're proving your worth to your organization, you're serving your consumers first, but you're also allowing everybody else to get the benefit of seeing how you're working with your team and also potentially using your assets. So I thought it was super smart the way that they made their Figma public. You know, the doc site oftentimes is that source of truth, but this kind of allows us to look into their design workflow a little bit more. And I thought it was well done.
Another interesting thing related to Figma, when we done the Salesforce design system inspect and reflect, we really liked the way how the Salesforce, they had this like grab and go examples. You can just select them and copy and paste into your Figma files. That was super easy, super fast. Another thing, let's go through their Storybook and GitHub. So the things that on the Storybook, I guess this is the link for their Storybook. Let me just quickly open it and see what do they have. So yeah, you will be able to find all the components that they are using. I like that you have ability to change different themes, and also they have interesting perspective on the density variations that you can adjust, and you have like 4 different types of densities. And it's interesting that they have this as touch density. Maybe they are trying to also like connect some of those like density to like perspectives with mobile apps and web. That's pretty interesting. So that's one of the things that is one of my highlights.
It's a very tidy Storybook, I think, compared to ours. And it matches the Figma and the documentation quite well.
Love it. Eric, thank you very much for sharing the density use cases. Yes, the touch version optimized for touch interactions in mobile and tablet devices. Great. And yeah, as we discussed, they have everything available on the GitHub. They have all the packages available under one repository. And also you will able to see within the packages, they have core. This is all the components that they have. They also have everything related to the Storybook. So you can actually take a look into any of the components and see how their Storybook is being documented. In Storybook, they are not documenting as much as other design systems. They're just showing the actual examples of how things could be used. The interesting part is that everything is available within one single repository where you can find everything related to all the packages that they have. The Storybook is integrated into that as well. So you could find some interesting practices here as well. Let's dive deeper into the next section that we have so far here is the components. The components is the challenging part as we discussed because we like this, and this is the topic that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, is when there are multiple design systems within the organization. Unfortunately, we only had access to the Chase bank, so that's why I was able to find some components, but they are not using sole design system yet. And we all understand that it's like very challenging. There are hundreds or even thousands of repositories that you need to support. And within the larger organizations where you have thousands of employees, it takes years to have this full adoption. And sometimes you might not even need a single design system. It's okay if multiple departments have their own things. But here, the interesting highlights that I saw is I put some components that I found within the documentation website and tried to find something similar to the components that are being used within the Chase. So for example, for the drop-down option, this is the one that they have within the documentation. But if I will go into the Chase bank, this is the variation of the component that they have. And just by looking by the class names, looks like the Chase Bank, they actually use GPUI. This is like maybe another design system that is not publicly available. When the Soul design system, as you can see here, just by the class names, they are using different naming conventions. So that's why it looks like the Chase Bank is not using the Soul design system yet. They might have something their own. If you will go into other fields like input fields, as you can see here, it's also a little bit different. And we can see that the Chase Bank is using GPUI design system. And the question here is, we have one unified design system within larger enterprise organizations, because like for the past maybe 7-10 years, every department, they started their own design system because they wanted to cover their own specific product challenges that are very maybe like domain specific or product specific. But now we see that larger enterprise organizations, they have multiple design systems under one organization. So the question is, do you believe that we should have one design system for all, or it's not possible?
I think several of us are probably eager to talk about the idea of systems, so I won't spend too long on that to open it up for other people to bring in that conversation. But for an organization of this size, I think systems of systems makes a lot of sense. It might not be in this section. I can find it here once I'm done chatting. But there's a article that Spotify wrote that's gotten really popular to kind of give a good example of a system of systems approach. I think what's key about it is really understanding who owns what. A lot of times where the stress is of the idea of having a singular design system for an organization this big is product teams that own specific products feel as though they don't have ownership over their product in certain ways, and that their product might have to suffer a bit because they're having to pull from a central resource that doesn't do what they specifically need. So Spotify's approach was great because they kind of allow those teams to own things, but the most basic, the most central resources remain central, and teams can kind of opt into that to get the core styling of things. But behaviorally, they can build out their own components and patterns if the core offerings aren't doing exactly what they need. I think some of the risks with that is, like when you're sitting on a design system team, you're thinking, oh, this allows a lot of variability that maybe we don't want. So I think then it's at the core, what can be variable, what can't be variable. And, that's usually going to be determined by business and consistency and like branding needs. So being really clear about that is good. But yeah, like as it goes out, it offers the flexibility that I think a lot of large enterprises need.
Love it. And please.
I was just going to say, what's interesting with the Spotify model is that they realized that there was lots of design systems and they wanted a way of bringing them together without closing them down and to create that little nucleus that you can see in that foundational area. What's interesting is Spotify is doing one thing, giving you the Spotify experience. And that's happening in cars and mobile and desktop and on fridges and things like that. So it's kind of like, it's quite nicely into those channels. When you're talking about a really large, complex organization like JPMorgan, they could have like 8, 10, they've definitely got like around 8, 10 design systems, but they're probably separated because of segments and business structure, because of how far away the teams are from each other and everything that Noel said, really. So it's interesting. Sometimes it's because of the org structure and accountabilities and things that relate to having multiple design systems happen in the same business.
And another big piece of it. Got Eric.
Oh, I was going to jump in and say, similarly, I think to draw an analogy to how we approach a card, right? And JPMorgan is a good example of this too. A card is not just a card, right? There are versions of that card. It's just complex enough that it's nuanced and separated into different resources, right? So they have a linked card, they have action card, and they have card. In the same way that I think if a design system was one and the same to try to have a solution for every portion of an organization, especially something at this scale, enterprise scale, I just don't think that it could be or would be suitable. And there are going to be nuances. There are going to be differences. The one property will not look the same. If you're looking for a brochure site, it's not going to look like your bank site, right? And so those separations between those intentions are probably just naturally going to happen. So I think that that's where, yeah, just at scale, it would be incredibly difficult, at least in my mind, to have one design system to sort of rule them all.
I agree. The other thing to think about is the tech stacks, especially too if you're a large enterprise, maybe acquired companies over the years. I think a great example of this, IBM has Carbon Design System. IBM acquired Red Hat a few years ago, but Red Hat has their own separate design system because they have different user groups, different platforms. Same thing too for an enterprise that might have to support mobile native apps or hybrid apps or a web app that's using web components. But if you're working on e-commerce, maybe React.js works better for you due to like performance and loading in. So tech stacks and also the politics of an organization kind of dictate to how your design system exists.
Totally. I love the point you made about politics too. And I think that's what's so interesting because a lot of times
Yeah.
when I hear people talk about systems of systems, it's kind of this idea of like, well, if everybody at least uses all of the design tokens, that can stay in the big core of the design system and everybody can just use tokens. But I also think that politics kind of get in the way of that really functionally working. Like you were mentioning, or somebody was mentioning, like a brochure site might want to use a slightly different shade or styling than a shopping site or a banking site for different reasons. And so figuring out like what's the most core and then allow people to pull on the core to then set up their own custom local tokens for their design system that's still, attached to the system as much as it can be, but allows for some of that differentiation. Because I think we're seeing kind of a pendulum swing of instead of always, saying like, for the sake of consistency, we're gonna do this. We're seeing the shift to how can we get what our product leaders and our design leaders really need to see with the brands for the consumer differentiation between products. Because I think that's really tricky, is to look like one brand but have distinct products. You probably are going to need flexibility in your tokens as well.
Right. With design systems, I would love for us to move away from consistency and instead strive more towards cohesion. Because when you have consistency, it kind of forces you to follow like this thing, sort of like uniformity. Whereas if you have a cohesive experiences, you still allow your product teams to cook to their own recipes and work within their tech stacks, but it still feels like the larger part of the brand. If I move from one product to the next, there's certain expectations I can have, but you're not limiting the teams to a particular tech stack or a very specific implementation of the design language. I'm in the middle of all this stuff right now because my company has multiple platforms, multiple design languages, so we're actively building out the systems.
I think
Love it.
I think it's horses for courses. Like it's all different. Every company is different. If you've got 1,000 amazing designers in all different groups, they're going to need a lot of flexibility and freedom to create really high value, high skill work. Then other small companies, they want kind of more off the shelf, simple solutions where they don't have so many and have an army of skilled groups. So it's kind of, they want simpler, more kind of restrictive things. So I guess that's the beauty of design systems. They can be very different.
Love it. And so for people who are listening, right? Let's imagine that some people who are listening have the same challenge and they would like to know like what is the right plan to start this, bringing all these different design systems together. How would you do that? Will you start maybe with design tokens or maybe with patterns? Maybe you will start with understanding what kind of main constraints of our design systems are. We talked about the tech stack, the platform. It could be mobile or desktop or any others. It could be another constraint, might be a org structure. Maybe some different departments are not talking to each other and like that's why they have like different design systems, or maybe like even domains. Like what will be your plan of action if you will to start unifying design systems within the organization?
I would always start
think
with
for-
people.
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead, John.
I would start with just people and relationships. Because I think if you've got 10 groups that don't speak to each other, there could be all sorts of water under the bridge in politics, as we kind of say, and you kind of go into this situation and there's fear and there's all sorts of kind of emotions. I would just start with trying to build some kind of relationship and cohesion so they can start trusting and speaking to each other, and then picking small things that we can work together in a really kind of transparent way. But it's a big cultural thing. Humans are the problem with design systems, I think, sometimes. Problems to solve.
Definitely starting with people and getting a baseline of the current state of things. Because
Mm.
one of my philosophies when it comes to approaching design systems is to understand the history of how things came to be where they are when you're first working towards creating a new design system. One, it informs you of the past and how you can learn from the past and make decisions, but it also helps you to have empathy for the folks that made those decisions.
So,
Because design systems can be one of those things where it's meant to help support the teams working, doing their best work, but you also have to think about the previous folks that may have worked on design systems and the decisions that were made.
yeah, 100%.
Totally.
Mm.
I agree with that for sure. I mean, anytime you're dealing or working within like a acquisition or a merger or something like that, the history of the team that's now becoming part of the larger design system at whatever company you're working with, it's so important to understand the history of that and, involve those people whenever possible. So yeah, I love that. Where I really love to start in those situations is with the live experience on both sides. What's live on our side today? What's live on the team that we're acquiring or merging with today? And kind of recentering both systems or the systems of systems around that. What's live today? What do we wish was live today? What needs to stay the same? Those kinds of things. I really like starting, whether it be in the browser or on your phone, whatever it is that you're working on, and kind of taking an inventory similar to what we're doing now of like, hey, what do we actually have? What do we actually use? Oh, looks like we don't actually use this design system on the live product, or it looks like we do. Those kinds of things, because I think if we just jump straight into what's inside the system, we miss the larger narrative of like how it's been working or not working within the organization.
Love it. Love it. We also had an interesting session related to the design ops where in order to build such relationships, there are some like practical examples that you could work on. Hopefully that will spark some ideas on the people who are listening, is to start with the org structure and just to define who are your partners are and have this kind of communication calendar view. Maybe in some cases you would like to connect with people every 2 weeks or every month just to share updates, just to get some learnings. Also, we discussed about talking, and I really like, Adriana, your highlight is that talk with the people who worked before on this design system to know what kind of learnings they have. So doing this kind of stakeholder interviews, internal interviews, setting up this internal voice of the customer in order to understand what worked, what's not, and yeah, building relationships with your design system customers from different departments. That might be helpful. Another thing that might spark some interesting conversations is this is the one that we've done with Design Ops Friends of Figma, where making changes within organizations is really hard. And that's why here's the one systematic perspective on how you can make changes within the organization. So that's a quick high-level approach on how you could do the change management with assessing current state, optimizing one specific aspect of it, then scaling it to others, making sure that it's being enabled across multiple teams, across multiple departments. And then the last one is to automate and maybe simplify things. And here's the way how, again, it might spark some interesting discussions, how you can actually find partners within your organization. And every design system is also thinking about how to create and set up this advocate platform within your organization. So you will not only talk with the leaders, but you will also have this bottom-up approach where you are actually talking with the people who are actually using your design system, creating this like advocacy behind it so that they could start enabling that within their teams, within their products. And that will help you to, again, spread and like scale your design system within the organization. And as a part of every stage of this process, like assess, optimize, scale, and automate, here are, as we discussed, right, doing interviews, surveys, workshops, understanding the org structure and team compositions, creating such playbooks and onboarding materials will help you to understand the starting point. And then for optimizing is having this design evangelists or design system advocates within your organization, having a change plan. So instead of focusing on the features, you're going to focus on like the teams who are using your design system. So you will plan when you would like to onboard specific team or when you would like to onboard specific product in the next quarter, for example, and what's the current status of their onboarding. Are they strong adopters of your design system? or are they struggling? So connecting all of that with the change plan and analytics behind it will help you to find all this kind of signals within large organizations at scale, documenting everything, ceremonies, documenting maturity models that will help teams to progress and understand where they are and where they would like to be. Office hours is another important thing, and I really love the way how Soul Design System approached it. They actually just open source their design system, and I feel like that's a very powerful move within large organizations, where when you have like this like public visibility, you have extra weight. So any thoughts on how to do the enablement and change management within large organizations?
I love the kind of bottom-up approach because that's how everything gets done, I think. But it's also worth mentioning the kind of top-down, kind of given the authority by leadership to do what you're doing. Because the problem is you walk into a business and you're given a role and there could be 10 other design systems. It might be the situation with the culture where they're kind of in competition in some way, because there's 10 different design system teams and they're kind of impressing. And sometimes it isn't as easy as just bringing everyone together and everyone just plays really well together. You do need a little bit of authority, from leadership on the fact that the leadership believes that we need to bring this all together. And then kind of coming from leadership really helps you have weight, as you mentioned, for walking into the situation to get people to engage as well.
Love it. And speaking about the top-down approach, the thing that I really love about the design system as a practice overall within the industry, there are two examples right now on the global stage from one specific public company, and I feel like we have two examples now, Atlassian and Salesforce. Oh, and the third one actually is Shopify, where on yearly global events within the organization, they have a dedicated section where they are talking about design system. So now I feel like we are so mature that we don't need to show the value of design system anymore. People understand. And like large organizations on the yearly conferences actually saying how they are creating design systems and what kind of value it brings to the organization, right? So this is like a very I love it. Thank you, John, for sharing the top-down approach as well. Okay, I know that we have a couple minutes left. Let me check what kind of other things do we have. Oh, another thing is, again, that might spark some interesting ideas from folks who are listening, is to visualize the current products map. Here's one of the examples where instead of focusing on the people, you could also focus on the products. And as we discussed, some of the constraints might be the tech stack, the platform, but by visualizing all the product lines within your organizations and trying to define what is their adoption status of your design system. Are you planning to onboard them? Are you actively onboarding them right now? Are they strong adopters, or they are struggling to adopt specific things? This kind of products map will help you also to see this larger picture and add things into your change plan when we talk about unifying design systems within the organization.
And I love that. I wanted to jump in and maybe kind of combine the two methodologies. I really kind of believe in both of them. I think there's a debate going around of like, is a design system, should it be seen as a platform? Should it be seen as a product? And I think in their own ways, like they're both metaphors for what a design system is, and there's helpful parts of both of those metaphors. So the platform metaphor is really helpful in that it is a structural piece of how your organization ships products. It's a central resource. It's integrated into everything. And so having a platform team is kind of a no-brainer on the engineering side. So having a UI platform team kind of, that's how the design system team is seen, I think is really helpful. Where I think the product analogy is helpful is for stuff like this, proving your value back to the organization. Because that's where like having a PM, having a roadmap, and not saying platform teams don't, but product teams really can't get away with not having that. And I don't think design systems can or should either, especially in a larger enterprise. So to me, like this is a really great external, when I say external, I mean for your product leaders to understand and get your consuming PMs really on board with the vision of the design system and really sell it to your consumers. Whereas I feel like the people forward approach is really good. So this to me is almost an outcome of talking to all of those people and doing all of those exercises.
Love it. Love it. This is like a really great summary, Noel. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I know that we are out of time. So thank you very much for joining the session. This session is different from others because we covered a lot on the change management and enablement. But if you would like to join other sessions as well, feel free to join the Shopify Polaris design system. I'm really excited about that because Denmal is going to be there. But also the Shopify design system is very mature and they put a lot of effort into web components instead of React components. So that will be an interesting discussion as well. Thank you very much for joining all the session. Adriana, Eric, John, Noel, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights. The FigJam board will stay available after the session as well. So hopefully we were able to spark some ideas on other people who are listening. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mairead. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.